The witching hour passed without incident. Rob, still unable to sleep, lay back on the bed he had made up in the lounge. He had been trying to get to sleep for more than 2 hours when he finally gave in, getting out of bed to make a drink. As he waited for the kettle to boil, he was trying to figure out what was keeping him from drifting off to sleep. Usually, the second his head hit the pillow, or whatever he was using as a pillow on any given night, he was dead to the world. But this night was different, and he didn't know why. Stirring the milk and sugar into his cup, he thought the only rational explanation were that he was thinking about whether or not the ghost would approach the girl again, or because he had been thinking about his past. It was the latter option. It had to be. No other hunt had ever caused him to endure a sleepless night. He had become desensitized. Sitting back on one of the seats around the small dining table, Rob's thoughts drifted to his past and to what happened after his initial meeting with Stephen. He had taken his time considering Stephen's offer, unsure of what to make of it. When he thought about all of the good and bad points of leaving the only house he had ever known to move in with a man he knew nothing about, it scared him. What was his life going to be like? What would happen to him? Then again, what would happen if he didn't accept the offer? Who else could protect him from whatever lay out there in the shadows? Almost 2 weeks had passed before Stephen showed up on Rob's doorstep, having paid for the living room window to be repaired, looking for an answer. When Rob opened the door, Stephen froze from shock, seeing the hallway full of boxes. "What's going on here, then?" Stephen asked, surveying the situation. "I thought you said I could move in with you," Rob replied. "Well, I did. In that case, I'll want to take some of my stuff with me." "True. You're really okay with moving in with me? You don't really know me." "Yeah, I'm fine with it. It beats living here alone. I've done that for long enough now." "Great. Are you almost ready then? You've got a lot to learn." "Yeah, another day or two. There are a few other things I need to sort out, but it's not a problem." During their first meeting it had been too dark for Rob to see any of Stephen's features clearly, but in broad daylight he saw a man no older than 30, in excellent physical condition, muscles rippling under his shirt. His cropped black hair and clean-shaven face gave him the appearance of any man you would pass in the street. There was nothing extraordinary about him. He was just a normal man. Rob felt at ease. "I can organise a truck to come and pick your things up if you'd like," Stephen said, placing a hand on top of a pile of boxes. "It's already done. I figured you'd be back before the end of the month," Rob said, taping up another box. "Though I do need an address for where to get everything delivered to." "Wow, I'm impressed. I'll give you the address before I leave. Have you decided what you're going to do with this house?" "I don't know, to be honest. I've lived here on my own for the past 2 years. No one knows my parents are dead, so this house is still in their name. I figured since it's all paid for, no one will know any different. I'll just leave it empty for now, keep it tidy, and be seen coming here every so often. That way I'll have somewhere to live when I'm older if I need it, or it's quite a good investment at least." "For a kid, you've got a really mature head on you," Stephen smiled. "You'll do well in my business." "Your business?" Rob asked, intrigued. "Hunting," Stephen said calmly. "And by hunting you mean—" "Well, I don't go around chasing rats, bears, or deer." "You mean things like that demon?" "Exactly. And you do that for a living?" "Yeah, and it can pay well too." "It pays well?" "Yeah. Ever since people have been watching films like The Exorcist, even Ghostbusters, they'll pay people like me to get rid of ghosts or demons they think they see or are possessed by. Obviously, most of them turn out to be fakes, but some are actually real, in which case I have proper work to do rather than just performing some kind of fake ritual to set people's minds at ease. Either way, I charge those people who hire me so that when I have to track down different creatures for free, like the demon I got here, I can afford to go wherever I'm needed." "That sounds pretty cool," Rob said, smiling. "Do you have any special powers then?" "Me? No." "Then how do you hunt?" "Once you know about the supernatural world and have learnt certain things from those already involved with it, you don't need special powers or genes to be able to see the signs that most other people just pass off as being strange." "Wow, that's amazing. Do you want a drink or something?" "No, it's alright. I just wanted to see whether or not you'd made a decision since I hadn't heard anything from you." "That's because I didn't have any contact details for you. I'd have phoned you otherwise." "All right. I can be a bit of an idiot like that. Anyway, I have to get going." "Really? Are you hunting something now?" "Yes, actually. But don't get too excited. You're not ready to hunt yet. This one I have to do alone. Just make sure you've got everything ready and then bring it to this address," Stephen said, taking a piece of paper from a pad in his pocket and scribbling down his address on it. Rob took a quick look at the piece of paper as Stephen handed it to him, trying to see if he knew where the house was, but he wasn't too sure exactly where it was located. Other than travelling to and from school or to the supermarket, he rarely went out. Even when he did, he never remembered the names of the streets. When he looked back up, Stephen was at the door, getting ready to leave. "Oh, you'll also need this," Stephen said, reaching into his pocket. Rob barely caught the key Stephen threw to him. He smiled, holding the key tightly in his hand, watching as Stephen disappeared down the driveway. He stood daydreaming about what it would be like to have a father figure back in his life, though at Stephen's age he would probably be more like a big brother, only 16 years separating them. 2 days later, Rob moved into Stephen's house, a huge detached Victorian townhouse in the middle of a large circular garden with a 2-story double garage erected to the side of the main building. The front door opened into a large hallway with mahogany panelled walls and a staircase leading to a landing that ran along the 2 side walls almost like a viewing gallery. When he was given a further tour of the house, Rob was amazed to find a lounge big enough to seat 8 people, a dining room with a banquet-like table, an office and a spacious kitchen with 2 doors leading off it, one out to the garden, the other to a utility room with washer and dryer. Upstairs there were 4 large double bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a separate toilet, and Rob's favourite room in the house, a study that was so big it could almost be considered a library. The door to each upstairs room opened up onto the landing above the entrance hall. It was in the library where Rob would do most of his studying. 2 of the walls were lined floor to ceiling with shelves housing rows of books, magazines and DVDs, all covering different types of creatures and folklore, both modern and ancient. A third wall held a whiteboard which had been surrounded by pictures and printed articles when Rob had first arrived. Stephen later explained that he liked to track a hunt using the whiteboard, surrounding it with all the relevant information he would need to find and kill it. The final wall was almost completely made of glass, facing out over the rear garden, giving a view of the nearby hills rolling toward the horizon. Stephen started Rob off easily with a question and answer session, which mainly consisted of Rob asking whether or not different creatures he'd seen in films or on television were real. Some were, others weren't. With those that were, most of the time, the real thing was nothing like the Hollywood version, merely sharing some similar traits. The training quickly moved on. Stephen gave Rob reading assignments to complete, taking up most of his time since he also continued with his schoolwork. They would head out to a shed at the bottom of the garden, almost completely sealed from sight by trees and other plant life, so Rob could learn how to kill different creatures using various weapons, from guns to knives, from fire to chants and rituals, all designed to either kill or free a trapped soul attached to a physical being. The thing that surprised Rob the most was that most of the things he had read in literature, especially when it came to killing the supernatural, didn't actually work. A vampire won't die if you put garlic in its mouth or show it a cross. It probably won't even flinch, instead taking the time to rip your throat out and bleed you dry. Most religious associations with the occult turned out to be nothing more than a fabrication, made up either by the church or by writers influenced by the church. Holy water is just a drink. A crucifix makes them smile and laugh because it shows a human being tortured. And God, he means nothing to them. He doesn't even exist. They are ruled by a different higher power. Despite spending hours reading book after book and training down in the soundproof shed, Stephen knew it was only a matter of time before he would have to introduce Rob to the world of hunting for real. After all, the quickest way to learn how to kill something is to go out and actually kill it. At first, Rob saw hunting as more of a hobby, treating it like homework. Slowly, he began to see it more like having a part-time job. Finally, after months of dipping in and out of different hunts, he caught the proverbial hunting bug. He loved the adrenaline the chase brought with it. It began to take over his life and consume every part of him. He looked forward to getting up each morning and setting out on a quest to eliminate whatever beast he could find. For nearly 5 years, Rob and Stephen were inseparable. They weren't just hunting partners, they'd become brothers, living together, hunting together. It had created a bond between them unlike anything Rob had experienced before, not even with his parents. On his 18th birthday, finally becoming a man in the eyes of the law, Rob decided to report his parents missing, knowing that after 7 years they would be declared legally dead and he would inherit all of their possessions. Not that he needed them. He was making a very healthy living working with Stephen. It was that same day when Stephen received a call from a local police officer he had been working closely with for more than 3 years. The officer was only young, 25 at best, but he reported any unusual cases he came across to Stephen, knowing that the police would not be able to deal with the case in any real way that would actually solve it. Stephen later explained that he had saved the police officer from an attack just months after he joined the force, and the officer felt as though he owed Stephen, and paid him back now by working closely with him and affording him many luxuries that other hunters were not gifted with. The phone call was to tell Stephen of some rather gruesome murders. Within seconds of hanging up the phone, having accepted the case, Stephen ran into the library pulling out a file, written in his own handwriting. "What's going on?" Rob asked, panting heavily after giving chase. "The murders the policeman just told me about. They're similar to some that have happened before, about 6 years ago. If I'm right, this is the work of a very deranged, vicious, deformed vampire." "A deformed vampire?" "Yeah, 10 times more dangerous than a normal vampire. This thing kills for the fun of it, tearing people to shreds, drinking just a little of the blood before moving on to the next victim, leaving the current one to bleed to death. Last time it attacked and killed 4 people just in one night, and just when I was about to catch it, it disappeared. Until now, that's what it looks like," Stephen said, frantically filling a bag with weapons. Having yet to encounter a real vampire, Rob was eager to go on the job with Stephen. He was nearing the end of school and knew that no matter what qualifications he achieved, he would become a full-time hunter rather than going into further education. Stephen agreed, saying it was the perfect opportunity for Rob to kill his first vampire. Rob had never been more excited. However, the excitement soon turned to fear, grief, and panic. Somehow the vampire had been tipped off that Stephen was hunting it. Either that or it had known he would track it down and had planned the whole thing, creating a trap which Stephen ran straight into. It was ready and waiting, ambushing Stephen as soon as he entered the house the vampire was hiding in. The vampire charged at Stephen, tackling him to the ground. Rob tried to intervene, but the vampire kicked him square in the chest, sending him flying across the room and crashing into a sideboard. Dazed from the impact, Rob cradled his head, his body momentarily paralysed. He could do nothing but watch as the vicious vampire bared its teeth, using them to tear open Stephen's throat, draining the blood that gushed from the wound with the desperation of a man who was almost dying from thirst, having spent a month in the desert. Stephen's lifeless body hit the ground with a crash, the skull cracking as it hit the floor. Rob was just beginning to regain his bearings when he saw the vampire glaring down at him, its mouth wide, teeth dripping with Stephen's blood as it growled at him. Before the vampire could attack, another vampire appeared out of nowhere, forcing a mask over the vicious vampire's face, closing the mouth containing the deadly teeth. The mask contracted around the vampire's face, making it whimper like a helpless animal trapped behind a muzzle and in terrible pain. 2 other creatures appeared, not vampires, but certainly not human. They took hold of the vicious vampire, dragging it away, leaving Rob alone with the vampire who had effectively saved his life. The vampire slowly approached him, long black hair flowing from the head of what Rob now saw to be a man. He was handsome, yet fearsome. Rob was surprised, assuming all vampires looked like the monster that had killed Stephen. Yet this vampire was unmistakably a human being at some point. Had the eyes not told the story of 1,000 years, Rob would have thought him to be a young vampire. But no, this was one of the elders. Standing no more than a metre away from Rob, the vampire bent down, a smile breaking on his cold face. "Hello, Rob," he said. "I'm Lazarus." Rob's eyes widened. He shook his head. "I take it you've heard of me." "You should have. Obviously I know who you are." Lazarus continued as Rob unconsciously began to relax a little. "I'm not going to hurt you, so feel free to sit back and just listen. I'm sorry about your friend there. That little deformed freak got off its leash. But don't worry, he will be dealt with. For now you must continue what you've been doing with Stephen, but you must do it alone. Hunting alone will make you stronger, and that's what we need, Rob. You are one of the chosen few. There is a plan for you. Who knows when? Who knows where? But when the day comes, she will have something for you. That is when you realize your destiny." Before Rob could say anything else, ask the questions he needed answers to, Lazarus disappeared. His form just vanished. No fading out, turning into an animal, or vaporizing into a wind. He just disappeared. Rob was sitting alone in the room where Stephen's broken body lay, his blood staining the rug. A piece of paper slowly floated to the ground just in front of him, settling by his left foot. He reached down, running a finger along the white material. Taking it in his hand, he held it in front of his face to read, though it took a moment for his eyes to focus properly in the darkness and with the tears now stinging his eyes. "Remember, Rob, you can never escape from this life, and you can never fight your destiny." Rob dropped the piece of paper, which burst into flames in mid-air. He put his hands on the side of his head, his temples throbbing, the effects of hitting the sideboard still taking their toll on him. Slowly he moved his hands from his ears until they were covering his eyes, tears running down his cheeks as the reality of Stephen's death began to sink in.